Now that we have our mother plants sorted and we've grown them from seed, it's time to talk about cloning. Cloning is absolutely essential to multiplying your harvest. It's something that almost all gardeners do, especially when it comes to cannabis. And in fact, cloning plants or propagating from a cutting is not unique to cannabis cultivation itself. As mentioned earlier, avocados and pitaya both really would not be at the supermarket without this feat of growing an entirely new plant from a mother plant. So when it comes to cloning, we need to know that our clones are going to be exact replicas of the mother plants themselves because they share the exact same genetic makeup. Which means that if you have a mother plant that's just going absolutely gangbusters, out of control, your clones are going to do the same thing. Granted, they will be smaller because clones do not grow as tall or vigorously as plants from seed, but these clones are going to give you a much more quality harvest than just growing an entire seed crop. So in addition to being exact replicas, clones, they're efficient in their use of light and space. Because they're a little smaller and because there's not as much variation, you're going to have a very uniform canopy that all produces the same kind of quality buds. Like I just said too, this quality harvest, even though they're smaller, if you have more of them going throughout the seasons, the season itself, based upon how we manipulate the light and the temperature and everything around us, it's going to give you an overall better yield by the time your season is done. Because, like I just stated, you're getting quality buds out of smaller plants that you just keep cycling through based off that one good mother plant. In addition to that, they do grow faster than the mother plants because you're skipping the seedling phase. You're skipping the entire germination. Once you cut a clone, within about 7 to 14 days, a week or two, you're going to have roots sticking out the bottom ready to be transplanted and start vegging. So this skips the entire phase of the weeks that it would take for your seedling from the time it emerges to get to the same height and to have 2 to 3 nodes like your clone is going to have. And even though your yield is going to be less per plant, it's actually going to be greater overall because you're going to have good quality from each plant. You're never going to have to worry about having one plant next to another plant, one that produces ounces and the other that produces less than. So, you can, many ways to get clones. You can buy them from the dispensaries. That's a great option. However, just be very mindful of any sort of pests or fungus or disease, any sign of deficiency at all, because in this early stage of the clone's life, it can be really detrimental and it just may never recover. That's why I recommend that you cut your own clones from the mother plants that we've grown. It just gives you much more quality control. You know exactly where it came from. Just overall the better option in my opinion. So be mindful when you're doing this of the temperature and the humidity, again, like we've discussed throughout the course. For the cloning process itself, I would argue that somewhere room temperature, 70, 75 degrees Fahrenheit is the ideal temperature for getting your clones. If they get too cold, they get too dry, it's game over. They're going to die. They just won't recover. It's not possible, as far as I'm concerned, to clone a plant by just sticking it in the rooting hormone, putting it in your grow medium, and leaving it outside. It's just, in my experience, never happens. You always want to have a propagation tray like we had, something to control the humidity, perhaps a heating pad underneath to make sure the temperature doesn't dip too low. Also watch it doesn't get too high, as this can inhibit nutrient uptake later on. But just be mindful of that. Like I have written here, 70 to 75, maybe about 80% humidity. Not too much more than that because you don't want to introduce any breeding grounds for bacteria and many infections, fungus, that sort of nature. And not too low because you don't want there to be too much evaporative moisture loss from the leaves themselves, therefore leading to wilting and ultimately death. Use a heating pad and make sure, again, as we discussed a couple lessons back, thermometer and a hygrometer, absolutely essential. This is going to measure your temperature. This is going to measure your humidity. They do come together. You can get one for $20 online, and it's just going to make your life much, much easier. Now, when it comes time to cut, there's a few steps that we need to go through in order to get there. As a matter of fact, let's start with step one, which is flush. You want to flush the mother plant out. You want to add just pure water, flush all the nutrients out of the mother plant, especially nitrogen. You want to flush the nitrogen out because nitrogen is conducive to foliage growth. So when you cut these clones, you don't want them to continue to produce leaves. You want them to switch back and produce roots. So you want to make sure you get the nitrogen out of your mother plants before you cut your clones. 2 to 3 days ahead of time, it's fine. Just flush them, plain water, and you'll be good to go. So you're going to flush the plants. You're going to pick a plant. We're going to actually bring one out here in just a second. In fact, maybe let's do that right now. Let's get a plant out here and show you exactly what you're looking for on your mother plant, where you need to cut. Now that we have our plant here in front of us, it's time to select which branch we're going to use as our next clone. Now, you want to make sure you have your grow medium and your rooting hormone at the ready, because once you do this, it's important that we move quickly to prevent any air from getting into the system, causing an embolism and hindering our root growth. I'm going to start by sterilizing my scissors before taking my cutting, as to not introduce any bacteria into the area that could lead to a possible infection. Now here, I've selected this branch. It has at least 3 leaves. 1, 2, 3, 4, as a matter of fact, 5 and 6. I'm going to take it after this node here. In fact, I'm going to snip below this node just to give myself a little bit extra space to work with, just in case I need it. So I take my scissors, I go down below the node, snip it, remove, and let's move on and get this in some growing medium ASAP. Now that I've selected my cutting from the mother plant, it's time to get it into the growing medium. I want to start by sterilizing my blade, whether I'm using hydrogen peroxide like here, alcohol, bleach, anything you have just to prevent bacteria from getting into the open wounds that you're about to inflict on the plant and make it susceptible to any sort of bacterial infection. So we sterilize our blade, and then we're going to start. I'm going to remove these lower leaves so as to give my plant a greater chance at rooting. Lastly, I want to slice the bottom of the stem at a 45-degree angle in order to give it more surface area for the rooting hormone that I dip it in here to adhere to. I'm going to let it sit there for just a second, soak it all in. Normally, when we'd be working with multiple cuttings at a time, you'd be doing all of them, just layering them into the glass, pulling them out, working systematically, making sure that the new cuttings have enough time to truly soak up a bit of that rooting hormone. Whether you use some store-bought stuff like we have here, you could use raw organic honey, molasses, aloe vera gel, all of it. Personally, I like the natural organics of the honey, the aloe vera, simply because I have a lot of aloe vera at my own house. So it makes it easier than going out and buying this. But you can get anything that you need. Now that our cutting has been submerged in this, it's time to take it out, stick it directly into the growing medium. You want to take care to insert it at least about a ½ an inch to an inch to truly cover all that rooting hormone that you've just placed on your cutting. Stick it in there, make sure it's nice and supported, and then move it over to your propagation area, like so, where it'll sit and start to develop its roots. Now I'd like to discuss, before we move on to the vegetative stage of growth, a quick little few things about nutrients, fertilizers, and the likes. Here we have a couple of different things that we all have, for nutrients. This is a rooting enhancer, helps with rooting of the clones that we just cut. This as well, a clone solution. Just, lots of sulfur, magnesium, calcium, but in very concentrated, small amounts, so as to not, overload the plants that we have. Spray bottle, always good for feeding. Here we have a little bit of liquid mycorrhizae, which is just it's a nice beneficial bacteria. It helps with soil development. This is great to add to your water when you feed or to your soil before you even plant. Some others, just various different brands, calcium, magnesium, some micronutrients, both organic, no dyes, none of that stuff. It's all basically just a general formula of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, along with other things mixed in. This is to help with us with our pH. But regarding fertilizers, you'll see store-bought fertilizers have NPK ratios. The N stands for nitrogen, and nitrogen, as we discussed, is good for foliar growth. It basically allows the leaves to go big, bright green, taking a lot of sunlight to help with photosynthesis. With phosphorus, P, that helps a lot more with the build of the plant, with the stems and the structure of it all. And when it comes to potassium, that helps it down in the root system to develop good roots. Some other things to know is that when your leaves are yellow, they're deficient. They're not underwater, they're not overwatered. Your plant's not getting enough nutrients to truly prosper, and it doesn't get that nice green chlorophyll color to absorb all that sunlight. So when you see your leaves start to yellow, it means you have a nutrient deficiency. You need to get on top of that. You can use your TDS meter that we discussed earlier to see what minerals you have in your soil and apply those that you need to continue growing. Burnt tips, however, is from overfeeding. When the tips of your leaves turn a burnt brown color, it's very distinct. You'll notice that this happened generally a couple of days after a heavy feeding. Means you added too much. Things such as nitrogen burn, like if you put coffee grounds, for instance, right in the bottom of your soil where the roots are, like if you dig your hole, pour some coffee grounds in, plant your plant over the top, you're going to get some nitrogen burn. So if you see your plants, the tips starting to burn, just flush it with water, regular water, as soon as you can, and then let it kind of, dry out a bit completely. Once you flush it with water, you don't want to let it just sit in water because the roots will rot and it'll just exacerbate the problem. Some other nutrients that we have down here, we have, blood meal. It's basically a byproduct of the animal packing industry, and it's a really good source of nitrogen and will raise the pH of your soil, similar to this right here, as a matter of fact. But it's natural. As natural as the animal packing industry can be, I suppose. Bat guano is a good source of phosphorus, helps improve the structure of the soil, and it's just a good source of, phosphorus, I already said. Bat guano specifically is something that you want to amend into your soil beforehand, because like I said, it does improve the structure of the soil. It's short for bat droppings, and what it is it slowly releases over time. So just sprinkling some bat guano onto plants that already exist, they're not going to get any of that benefit because it has to break down organically. And in doing so, that process, it just takes time. So you want to add it to your soil a couple weeks, maybe a month before you even put plants in the ground. It's just something to think about as you're getting ready to grow. In addition to that, we have kelp. Kelp is a fantastic micronutrient because the ocean is full of vitamins and minerals. And the kelp, it absorbs this, and then when dried, it retains all those properties. So kelp meaning seaweed, it's just another organic material. It's rich in potassium and plenty of other micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals that are beneficial to your plant. It is very potent, however, so you only want to use trace amounts of it. Like when you go to use it for your plants, you want to use about a quarter cup for when you're feeding, because it is so potent that this algae, this ocean algae, is just something to use sparingly, because then you'll get great results. Worm castings is the last one that I have written down specifically, and it's pretty miraculous what worm castings can do. Worm castings are the byproducts of what worms are doing in your soil. As they eat the organic material and decompose whatever is in there, they leave behind whatever castings are exactly. I'm not personally sure. I could fathom a guess, but I'm not sure it's appropriate for classroom talk. Anyway, worm castings, one of the things they do is they remove toxins and heavy metals from your soil. So it's a great thing to do. That way your plants don't soak up these toxins and heavy metals. For instance, you can see sometimes in plants as they're growing, if they're in a metal container, they actually leach the metals from the container itself, and you'll see little spots. It almost looks like someone got a little bit of silver spray paint on your plant, and it's in fact the minerals, the metals that you've pulled up from the roots expressing themselves in the leaves. In addition to that, they carbon balance your soil, helps with maintaining the pH, And just improving water retention, making sure that the water that you give to your plants doesn't just immediately run out the bottom of the bed or the pot or wherever grow medium you've chosen. It's really, in fact, you'll find that many soils, including the one we showed you earlier, is a mixture of bat guano and worm castings. Very common. I recommend looking for them if you go to a big box store to buy your soil, because it's what I would use. In addition, lastly, there's plenty of other nutrients that we have out there. We were discussing earlier amongst ourselves, fish meal, fish byproduct, bone meal, which is the same as blood meal, but it's just bones, calcium, that sort of thing, magnesium, all the stuff that plants need to grow. And then you have store-bought fertilizer. You just follow the NPK ratios in regards to what your plants need, courtesy of the metering that you did with the TDS meter. You see what your plant need, you can go to the store, you can buy exactly what it is. Say you need foliage growth, more nitrogen, look for an NPK ratio where the highest number of the solution is the first one, something like 12:2:0. That means a lot of nitrogen, a little bit of phosphorus, not really any potassium. And just you have to do your research based upon what your plants need themselves. But those are my recommendations as far as the nutrients to use in your own garden.